Hey guys, it always seems like a cheap shot to me to say to people, this guy's problem is he doesn't read books. This guy's problem is he doesn't study history. Or a famous phrase in the vegan movement, this person isn't learning the lessons of history. It's so trite, it's so shallow. But, this is the 21st century. And often enough, the problem I really do need to address is that somebody, hasn't been reading books. Now, why is that increasingly a problem? Partly it's just because books have a lot of competition these days. I mean, there are a lot of other ways you can get information. You can stay current, you can stay contemporary, and you can stay feeling cosmopolitan and plugged into what's going on without reading books. But there are disadvantages to this kind of elective illiteracy. And I see them across the political spectrum, and I see them especially in this kind of, ex-left-winger movement. I mean, look, veganism is a political movement, and there is a counter-movement of ex-vegans. Islam has to deal with a counter-movement of ex-Muslims. I guess it's not so surprising that, broadly speaking, the left has to deal with ex-leftists. But I see a narrative being spun, a propaganda claim being purported by many people on YouTube, including Sargon of Akkad, that somehow the left wing has gotten worse and worse and worse during his lifetime, which I think is approximately the same as my lifetime. And it's not true. And for anyone out there who still reads books, it should be resoundingly obvious how hollow, specious, and misleading this claim is. Sargon, can you remember the days when the left wing was defined by making excuses for the atrocities carried out by the Soviet Union? This is some slang that hasn't been used much since the early 1990s, but one of the insults against left-wingers was to refer to them as tankies. That's T-A-N-K, tankies. Tanky was an insult meaning you are somebody who still makes excuses for the Soviet Union when they roll tanks on peaceful protesters. That's shortened down to a one-word insult. That someone's a tanky. So even when the Soviets were brutally repressing dissent, for example, in the Czech Republic, but anywhere, in Europe, in Asia, in Afghanistan, or of course within the Soviet Union, within Russia, there was a time when the left-wing discourse was dominated by surreal apologetics for communism, for economic theories that made no sense, got no results, or in some cases were directly linked to causing mass starvation. I've lived through a series of incredibly dark and dismal periods in the left wing. There was this period of sort of, I'd say, post-communist recuperation when communists couldn't... Sorry, I'm saying communists. A lot of these people were crypto-communists. When people on the left couldn't nakedly use Marxist sources anymore. They couldn't directly use socialist reasoning. And they instead turned to Hegel and Hegelianism. And you had leftist Hegelianism. It was obscene. It was grotesque. You can't believe how awful that period was in the left. I'm sorry, if you didn't live through it, I really mean that honestly. There is no way right now you can go on Google or go on YouTube and see how awful that was, because that period of the left wing was not preserved on YouTube. It was unbelievably mind-blowing awful. Can any of you guys remember the attempt of the left wing to rehabilitate Immanuel Kant? The philosophy, Kantianism, like a political Kantianism. Again, because they had this period of not being able to directly work with or from Marxist and socialist sources. And, then after that, finally, I don't know when it started, I guess maybe sometime after the rise and fall of the Occupy Wall Street movement, I think we had a return to naked, honest Marxism. Marxism calling itself Marxism, and other people being nakedly and honestly anti-Marxist, being, left-wing, but openly pro-capitalist, pro-free markets, and so on. You want to tell me that the current era, when there is no doubt the single greatest proponent of the mainstream left is Bernie Sanders. I mean, globally, no doubt. Yes, there's also Jeremy Corbyn in England. There are specific leaders everywhere, of course. Italy, Sweden, Taiwan, Hong Kong, of course. But if we're talking about the English language world, the English-speaking world, And, even if we're talking in a global abstraction of all languages, the outstanding figure of the present era is Bernie Sanders. And other left-wingers can situate themselves relative to the norm established by Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, he doesn't have all the answers. Bernie Sanders doesn't even have all the right questions. But he's a tremendously positive figure for the left. In contrast to Barack Obama, and in contrast to the incredibly dark and dismal period that followed after the collapse of Soviet communism in 1989, and in contrast to the unbelievably hypocritical and immoral period of making excuses for barbarism, barbaric mass murder, mass starvation, lies, and communist propaganda that went from World War II, at least, up to 1989. I mean, certainly some people were already making those pro-communist statements going back to 1917 and so on. But there was certainly a distinctive era from World War II up till 1989. And, those old habits died hard, partly because those habits were paid for by donors who were accustomed to giving money to keep that propaganda cycle going in the Western world. So, Sargon of Akkad, I think you've got a real short memory. I think you've got a real thin skin. And I think you're focused on some of the shallowest epiphenomena of the left wing on social media. This stuff you're complaining about, it adds up to nothing. And I think a sincere and somewhat deep engagement with the contrast we're looking at now between the era of Barack Obama, the era of Tony Blair. What a dark day for anyone left of center the Tony Blair era was. It's indescribable. Have you read, so again, I don't know if you people read books. Have you read The Stakeholder Society by Tony Blair? I have. The Stakeholder Society by Tony Blair was the equivalent of Mein Kampf for left-wingers who wanted to sell out the left wing to corporate interests. It really is, it's everything that today Jimmy Dore complains about within the Democrat Party in the United States. Obviously, this is a British source. It's really a lightning rod. You can look back on that and see where that era began and why it eventually had to end. And yes, the era we have now, whether it's articulated in terms of Jeremy Corbyn, who by no means is right about everything, by no means has all the answers, by no means has the question. Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders, this is an unbelievably optimistic time to be engaged with the left. And don't let anyone tell you on the basis of snide comments on Twitter and YouTube videos that that's not the case. I want to say, guys, you can click below this video and see my playlists. I have one video that's simply titled, Why I Am Not Left Wing. But I feel like putting up a video saying, look, this is why I've still got to hang out around the entrance to the left wing club, because there's nowhere else for me to hang. Right now, there is no alternative. And for people who don't have the money or the clout to start their own political party, if you care about health care, prison reform, due process of the law, elections, corruption, if you're an anti-corruption, if you care about ecology, the environment, deforestation, water pollution, air pollution, if you care about animal rights, if you care about indigenous peoples, it's deeply troubling to me that in so many countries, the left has a monopoly on these issues. I wish they had competition from the center, from the right, from Buddhist organizations, whatever, from some new political paradigm. I'd love it if there was a lively competition to represent these issues outside of the left. But for most of us, we have to face up to the fact that there isn't. So either you're going to take a stand to fight for the future of the Democrat Party within the United States, the Liberal Party or the Labor Party, depending on where you live, Either you're going to fight to reshape the future of the left wing, or it seems to me you're just going to give up, unless you're in that tiny minority of people who can create their own rules, play their own game, and start their own party. Guess what? Bernie Sanders is one of those people, but even he is still choosing to play the game within the Democrat Party because even he doesn't think he can start his own thing.